Hi, everybody. Today, I want to talk about something different than primitive reflexes, and I felt this was really important because I know that when I start talking about a certain thing related to brain development, related to brain organization, and things that we don't look at or that, just basically get overlooked in traditional education and so forth, if I do a series and people kind of get stuck on that one thing and think that's what they need to address and that's the end of the story. And so I want to talk today about brain hemispheric imbalance because integrating primitive reflexes is super important. It is like one of the first things we need to do, one of the first layers of that foundation when we are basically, building our child's brain and making it better. However, we need to address brain hemisphere imbalance. And if you have a child who has, learning difficulties or certain struggles and so forth, but they also have these incredible gifts or strengths, that's what can make us so confused and wonder, how can this be, that they have, like, a perfect example of is a child with dyslexia. They tend to have really good, kind of 3D vision, and just they often are good artists. They tend to be, I see a lot of guys, especially when I used to teach, boys who are really good with mechanics and engineering. They could look at a car and know exactly what they need to do with the motor and all that type of stuff. So they can be really gifted in one area, and yet they can struggle with, either basic or academic things in another area. And that is because there is a disconnect. And we often will say that there seems to be a disconnect, right? They're able to do something, but we notice that there's these struggles that really prevent our children from being able to shine when they're struggling with learning difficulties. And so I want to talk about this because while primitive reflex integration is super important, and it's a big thing that we need to address if primitive reflexes are retained, it is not the end of the story. There are so many other things that we need to do as well. So kids with learning and behavioral difficulties often tend to have a brain imbalance. So what that means is that one side of their brain, one brain hemisphere, if you will, is overdeveloped and one side is underdeveloped. And so I want to be clear on the difference in dominance. So we all have a dominance, right? My husband is really left-brained. I'm really right-brained. That's okay. It doesn't mean that I have an underdevelopment or I have some kind of learning difficulty or any other problem. And the same goes for my husband. The problem is when that dominance, it's not just a dominance or a preference. It ends up with, in infancy, typically what happens is that one side of the brain, for various reasons, I'm not going to get into all those reasons today, fails to develop at the same rate as the other side. And I want to be clear too that difference, like the right side of the brain develops in the first 3 years of life, and then it's the left side of the brain that picks up the pace. And it's kind of a back and forth thing until age 7. So there's a reason where certain factors can affect the brain development at different ages and so forth. So the long and the short of it is primitive reflexes are great. They need to be integrated, but they are homolateral movements, meaning one-sided movements. When those primitive reflexes get integrated, as they do that, kids start doing creeping and crawling and so forth. And that is a cross-lateral movement, right? Because as my right arm or hand goes forward, my back leg does, my left leg and so forth goes forward. And it's the same with the way we walk. And what that motion does as infants is it helps to build the corpus callosum, which is between the two brain hemispheres, and improve communication between those two brain hemispheres. So that's one aspect that can contribute to a left or right brain weakness or a left and right brain or right brain overdevelopment. That is not the only factor, but that's one reason why being able to, or children crawling and creeping and all these baby carriers are not such a good thing. So the long and the short of it is that imbalance can occur for various reasons. And what happens is that one side of the brain develops too fast or overdevelops and starts compensating for the side that's not. And so, like I said, we all have a dominance. It's not the same thing as kids who have an overdeveloped area and an undeveloped area. So we hear of twice exceptional children, right? Kids that I've been talking about, gifted in one area and like could be geniusly gifted, right? Not just they're really strong in art. Like I remember teaching a kid, he was insanely gifted in mathematics. He had like, I think he was in grade 7 and he was doing grade 9 or 10 mathematics. And yet he had really poor social skills, really poor emotional regulation and so forth, which is a very right brain thing. Math is a very left brain thing. And so the result most likely was that this child had an over and underdeveloped sides of the brain. So what can happen is that when one side is underdeveloped, it typically, the research of Dr. Melillo, who's a neurologist and chiropractor, found that what happens is that one side of the brain is underdeveloped. It's usually 2 to 3 years behind in development. And so after a while, what can basically happen is the overdeveloped side doesn't even bother sending signals anymore to the weaker side. It does what's called task takeover, and it starts doing everything. Okay, so let me know if you've ever had an experience where you just start taking over because somebody is not showing up to work or somebody in the home is not pitching in, and it's just easier for you to do it yourself than to wait for them to do that. Okay, let me know if you can relate to this, because that's basically what's happening when there's an under and over development. And so what happens when this task takeover occurs, not only does the weaker side of the brain continue to develop, not develop and it just becomes progressively worse because it's just getting poor and poor development. What also happens is the side that is stronger, that has done the task takeover, continues to get overdeveloped. And what research has found is that this is the reason why for a lot of these kids, and I say this and I don't want to scare anyone because that's not always the case, but a lot of these kids, sometimes things can get exponentially worse depending, and there's a lot of factors, right? I've talked about nutrition and gut healing and all of that stuff too, but because as the brain just continues to overdevelop on one side and the brain one side continues to just lag, we're going to end up with a more severe or pronounced deficit. And so it's not uncommon for parents to call me and be like, man, he's like 10 or he's 11 and it just seems to be getting worse. I thought it was getting better, but then this is worse. And that's because the imbalance is becoming more pronounced. So basically that other side of the brain is doing all the work. And what Dr. Melillo found with his research in the 1990s is that kids with learning and behavioral issues, who struggled with this, it was very much related to a disconnection related to immature development of one side of the brain, that most of these kids had a left or right brain deficit. So perfect example, I'm breaking it down really simple, is kids with a dyslexia tend to have a left brain delay or deficiency and a right brain overdevelopment. Kids, for example, with autism and ADHD tend to have a left brain overdevelopment and a right brain delay or deficiency is what they call it. And so as the developed side continues to strengthen, we end up with what Dr. Melillo coined as developmental asynchrony or brain imbalance. And so the good news though is that this is not permanent. All we have to do is stimulate in the correct ways the weaker side of the brain. Because really it's a result of less electrical activity on the weaker side of the brain. And what he found is that when he looked at the brain scans and so forth, is that it's not related to an injury, it's not related to brain damage, a genetic mutation, a chemical imbalance, whatever you want to say. It's very much related to just, maybe not creeping, crawling. Maybe there was some kind of toxicity in infancy. There's a lot of factors that can affect it. It could be as a result of something that happened during birth. It also can result because of the primitive reflexes not integrating, right? So there's a lot of factors, and those ultimately we want to look at them, but it's not about guilt. It's just about addressing them so that we can move forward. So basically when one side of the brain is not functioning as well because of this underactivity, due to less connections and neurons, it's not going to be as well developed. Yes, Kim, it is so great, right? I never come on here and tell you the bad news of this is how awful it is and there's nothing we can do. This is just how your child's brain is. So all stuff that we can address and so forth. So before I continue, let me know in the comments below if you're watching live, or even if you're watching the replay, do you see this with your child where they have a strength in one area and they have a weakness in another area, and it's so frustrating, where you see there's these very clear imbalances or disconnects with how they're able to function or how their brain is working. So what Dr. Melillo and other doctors have found, and this has been decades of research, is that we can correct this, we can improve it, and the best thing about it is that it's 100% safe. It does not require medication, it does not require surgery. It's all about just stimulating the side of the brain that is weak. So also, what's really interesting, what Dr. Melillo found, is that depending on the hemisphere that is weak and the hemisphere that is dominant is going to produce different symptoms, right? So I talked a little bit about dyslexia versus ADHD, and I know some of you are thinking, but my child has dyslexia and ADHD. And what's really interesting is that sometimes when we do the screenings, is that we'll find out sometimes kids are misdiagnosed with dyslexia, for example, and really it's a focus problem that's preventing them from being able to read, or vice versa. Kids are diagnosed with ADHD and it's because they're so darn bored in class and so forth that it's preventing them from being able to read well. So the thing is that there's a lot of factors, and we have to look at all of them. And definitely dyslexia and true ADHD can occur together. It's not always as cut and dry as that, but it's a huge, I find, field that's so interesting and so unaddressed, because we need to address these imbalances that have been found to be so common in these kids and so forth. So what else was found is that the symptoms do not just pertain to the brain, it pertains to the body as well. So when there is hemispheric imbalance within the brain, it will affect immunity, motor function, digestion, inflammation, sensory processing, and so much more. So just to break this down in really simple terms, the left side of the brain is the gas, the right side of the brain is the brakes. So for example, my daughter had an overdeveloped left side of the brain and her immune system was all gas. So no surprise there that she had an autoimmune condition, right? A neuroautoimmune condition that was attacking her brain. There was just too much gas. And was there other factors as well, like mold and strep and, poor gut health? Yes. And then you put in a left brain overdevelopment. That's the same with tics, by the way, that as well as OCD. It's typically a left brain overdevelopment, just way too much gas, not enough brakes. And anyone who has a kid with ADHD, I know that you're saying, yes, that's my kid, way too much gas, not enough brakes. So basically hemispheric integration, what it does is it stimulates and strengthens the weaker brain hemisphere. So I just really think it's important to acknowledge this and be aware of this factor, because I talk to a lot of parents and they, want to integrate primitive reflexes and they think it's all about integrating primitive reflexes, or they're really disappointed because primitive reflex integration got some results, but not the results that they had hoped for. And the thing is that number one with primitive reflexes, you want to make sure that the person you're working with is using research evidence-based exercises and screenings, because there's a lot of people who aren't, and I mean no attacks towards them. There was a time when some of the exercises I was doing, I didn't realize they were not evidence-based. Were they somewhat effective? Kind of, sort of. But you want to make sure that the reflexes and the process that the child does is effective. And then also, you can't just stop at primitive reflex integration. You absolutely have to address stimulating the weaker brain hemisphere if that is the case, and there's ways to screen for that and so forth. So that is what we're doing in my program. I've actually just added this section in not that long, like I'm in the process of adding it in and so forth. And I'm so excited because I know it helped my daughter so much. And I've seen what it does to help other kids and so forth, and can even work for adults. It's not uncommon for adults to say, hey, I just found out that either this reflex was integrated or I definitely have an imbalance. It's more than just a dominance and so forth. So let me know in the comments below or the replay if this sounds like this could be your child. And if you haven't grabbed my free starter kit, the Laser Focus Learner, do grab that. I'll post that in the comments, or the link for that in the comments below. And don't be shy to book a free clarity call if you're interested in starting my program, the Full Potential program, or the Full Potential Formula, which is a 6-month program that really gets to the root cause of learning and behavior issues. So thanks for watching, everyone, and I will be talking more about this as we continue on. Thanks.